Hey everybody, it's Willbits. We're here for the exciting conclusion of Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Dual Destinies Case 5. Curse of the Mummy Pirate! Curse of the Space Ghost Mummy Pirate! Curse you, Apollo!
Mr. Justice, please explain yourself!
It's very simple. There isn't much to explain. First I was a mummy, then I was a pirate mummy, then I was a space pirate mummy, now I'm a space ghost pirate mummy. The defendant, Miss Athena Sykes, might not be innocent. What are you talking about? The case from 7 years ago has been settled. I'm not talking about the past here. I'm talking about the present case. It's still not clear who killed Clay Terran. That's the only thing I care about! But, Apollo, why would you... Miss Sykes, please listen quietly to what I have to say. What in the world is Apollo trying to do? Your Honor, please allow me a little of the court's time.
But this is a trial for the case from 7 years ago.
Miss Blackwell, I'd like to ask a favor of you. Just as you lost someone close to you, I lost someone close to me, too. I'm sure you want to know the real truth of what happened as much as I do.
Apollo. Sure, you know I'm all for the truth. Now let's see you expose the princess's guilt. Judge, I give my permission. Continue with the trial.
Very well. Is that all right with you, Prosecutor Edgeworth?
The prosecution has no objections. Let's hear Mr. Justice's testimony. I'll have the police's investigation report brought immediately. Not you too, Edgeworth. I really hope it's because you have something up your sleeve.
Very well. Your opening statement, please, Prosecutor Edgeworth.
As you wish, let's review the case of the murder of Mr. Clay Terran. It was made clear in the previous trial that Solomon Starbuck was not his killer. Therefore, the true culprit was someone else. On that day, this culprit waited for the astronauts in boarding lounge 1, when the two men made their escape out of the Space Museum. The killer attacked Mr. Terran with the same type of knife that was used 7 years ago. The murderer then escaped into the Space Museum. Next, Director Yuri Cosmo switched the launch pads. After that, the culprit exited the Space Museum and escaped via boarding lounge 2. Therefore, this trial must make clear who Mr. Terran's true killer was. In other words, we must discover who it was that escaped through the Space Museum that day.
Thank you, Prosecutor Edgeworth. Mr. Wright, is the defense ready?
Yes, Your Honor. I'd better rearrange my evidence. Boop, 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 boop. Oh, we have more stuff put in now?
Now then, Mr. Justice, your testimony, if you please.
All right, Apollo Justice's accusation. I suspected Ms. Sykes of the murder of Clay Terran. My growing suspicions were confirmed when this incriminating evidence presented itself. In addition, she's the only one who could have utilized the launch pad switch to escape. That is why I wish to indict Ms. Sykes on the charge of murder. Out of the frying pan and into the other frying pan.
Order! Order in the court! Mr. Justice, you realize you are charging your own coworker with murder, don't you?
Yes, Your Honor, because that is the conclusion my investigation has led me to. But, Apollo, Why? How could you suspect me too? Mr. Wright, your cross-examination, please. I don't get it. Just what did you find out over the past few days to make you think this? I suspected Miss Sykes the murder of Clay Tarrant. Holy! Jigga what? What first made you suspicious of Miss Sykes? It all started when Miss Sykes and I were investigating the crime scene. When she saw the weapon that killed Mr. Tarrant, my bracelet reacted. She said she'd never seen the knife before, but my bracelet told me otherwise. And then every time after that, my bracelet would react when she talked about the case. Poor Apollo must have been beside himself during that investigation. I didn't know what to do or think. I couldn't even sleep. In that condition, I knew I wouldn't be any good in court. So I decided to wear an eye patch, so I wouldn't be able to perceive any of her tells. So that's why Apollo was acting so strangely. But the reason Miss Sykes unconsciously reacted to the knife that way is because she stabbed her mother's murderer with one identical to it 7 years ago. Objection! But that knife was also the murder weapon that was used to kill Clay Tarrant. My bracelet could have also reacted to her because she knew she was his killer too. I guess he has a point. But my bracelet wasn't the only reason I became suspicious of her. My growing suspicions were confirmed when this incriminating evidence presented itself. Hold it! That's the lighter that was found in the Space Museum with her fingerprints on it, right? But even if it seems decisive, there must be other facts we don't know about yet. If that's so, go ahead and prove it then. Look, honestly, I don't want to believe it's true either. But Miss Sykes was the only one who was in the Space Museum at the time of the murder. But, Mr. Justice, Miss Sykes had absolutely no motive to kill Mr. Tarrant. Objection! 7 years ago, Miss Sykes lived at the Cosmos Space Center. It wouldn't be strange if she had some kind of connection to him. Besides, people sometimes kill for motives we can't even imagine. That's pretty crappy, Apollo. I know you've seen plenty of cases like that in your own career, Mr. Wright. I still can't believe this. How can you actually suspect Athena, Apollo? In addition, she's the only one who could have utilized the launch pad switch to escape. Hold it! How? What do you mean? Isn't it possible that somebody else used that same escape route? I'm afraid not, Mr. Wright. Why not? Recall there's a security camera in boarding lounge 1 aimed at the launch pad door. It's the camera that captured Mr. Tarrant and Mr. Starbuck. But there's also another security camera in boarding lounge 2. It recorded Mr. Tarrant's killer, or rather, Miss Sykes, coming out of the Space Museum. A camera in boarding lounge 2? First I've heard of it, but it makes sense. Athena said she'd snuck into the Space Museum the night before the incident, and then was overcome and passed out until around noon the next day. I was out until about noon the next day. I didn't even know about the explosions. When I woke up, nobody was around, so I just went out into boarding lounge 2. That must have been when the camera captured her, and that's what made Apollo suspect her even more. But wait a minute. In that case, it most likely recorded the true culprit as well. Objection! That's a negative on that one too, Mr. Wright. In the footage taken after the incident, Miss Sykes is the only one who appears. What? Why?
Order in the court.
That can't be, but if it is, then it's incredibly incriminating. Wasn't it you who proved in the previous trial that the way the true culprit escaped was via the Space Museum after the pads had been switched? a fact you previously proved turned on its ear, leaving your client high and dry. I must say, that is vintage Phoenix Wright. Ugh. That's why I wish to indict Miss Sykes on the charge of murder.
Hold it!
Believing in your client to the end is a basic principle of good defense. Shouldn't you extend that same principle to your own coworker? You're probably right. Maybe I'm not even fit to be a lawyer. However, I don't care. This case is special to me. Clay was my friend. And that's why I just have to know the truth. Apollo suspected his trusted coworker of killing his friend. To dispel his doubts, he investigated on his own, but that only led to more doubts. Apollo must have been really struggling with this. Well, Apollo may have doubts, but I'll say it again. Athena Sykes isn't the murderer. Then I have only one thing to say. Evidence is everything in court. Well, Mr. Wright, think you have the concrete proof to knock down my arguments?
Your arguments have been very clear, Mr. Justice, and your facts appear to be indisputable.
Well, Mr. Wright, what do you think of my theory? Looks like not even you can deny it. Miss Sykes was the only one who used the only possible escape route. Under these circumstances, there could be no other suspect but the defendant. Unless you think there was an alternate escape route. Is that what you think, Mr. Wright?
Is that what you think, Mr. Wright?
Is that what you think, Phoenix? Was there an alternate escape route? Yes? Yes, of course there must have been. Just don't ask me what. You're just bluffing again, aren't you? Me? Bluff? Nah, he knows me too well. It's fine, Mr. Wright. Even a bluff would suit me just fine. As long as you can clear up this doubt inside me. Wait, so is that what this is all about? I want to believe in Athena. I really do. But what is faith without doubt? That's why I need to question her guilt. So that once the truth finally comes out, I can really, fully trust her. So that you can really trust me? It seems your junior partner has just showed us what trials are truly all about. I believe you're right. We prosecutors painstakingly question every detail in pursuit of the defendant, while we lawyers believe in and defend our clients to the end.
When both sides go all out against each other, that's when we discover the truth.
Precisely. And when the battle is over, we will understand the true meaning of trust. That is exactly what trials are about. Wouldn't you agree? Yes. I couldn't ignore the seed of doubt that was growing inside me. So I decided I needed to face it head on. No matter what the truth is that's waiting ahead, I won't be afraid. That's so like Apollo, always uber earnest about things like this. Mr. Justice, I vow to dispel every last bit of doubt in your heart. Good, because I want to believe in Miss Sykes again. You're really hoping there was an alternative route, aren't you, Apollo? But if I use the process of elimination, there really aren't that many possibilities. Director Cosmos was at the southern exit, leaving only the control room and the corridor to the Space Museum. Which door could the culprit have escaped through? Come on, Mr. Wright. Where do you think the culprit escaped to? So either they went through Cosmos, or they had to go through the Space Museum corridor. They really only could have escaped to the corridor to the Space Museum. All they had to do was use the unconscious Mr. Starbuck's prince to get through the door. It appears that all you're trying to establish is Miss Sykes' guilt. If the culprit used that route, the only exit would have been the boarding lounge, too. The logical conclusion of your argument is that the killer is none other than the defendant. I knew it! That's the only way it could be, huh? If the culprit escaped into the corridor, that leads to the Space Museum. Then I guess it's true. The only exit would have been into boarding lounge 2. But Miss Sykes was the only person captured by the boarding lounge 2 security camera. I investigated the crime scene thoroughly. But the only place the culprit could have escaped to was the Space Museum corridor. There weren't any other secret corridors or anything. So that leaves us with no other conclusion to draw, but that Athena Sykes was the culprit. What could the answer be? Was there really no other escape route? But, hold on a second. What if... Where did those mysterious leaves we saw in the corridor come from? What if they're a clue to the culprit's real escape route? I think it is possible that the culprit escaped into the Space Museum, but then came out using a route other than into boarding lounge 2. Oh? Launchpad 1 and the Space Museum were switched after the bombing, meaning the Space Museum corridor was moving along the rail at the time. Which is exactly when an alternative escape route opened up for our culprit. Are you kidding me? Judging by the intense look in your eyes, I take it you're serious. Very well then, Mr. Wright, do tell. Where could the culprits have gone from the museum corridor besides boarding lounge 2? They could have gone anywhere outside, right? Yeah? They left a clue behind. I guess that's true. Thanks for the pun there, fella. We found something odd while investigating the museum corridor this afternoon. Namely, a few dead leaves on the floor. Considering where dead leaves come from, dead trees or live trees, they point us to exactly where the culprit escaped to. Yes, I remember seeing some leaves myself. Ah! Do you mean? Yep, while the Space Museum was in motion, just beyond the corridor safety door was an alternative place that the culprit could use to escape. In other words, the culprit's real escape route was the area outside the Space Center. Freaking insane!
Objection!
Do you know how impossible that would be? That corridor was level with the 3rd floor. Even if the culprit tried to leap to the outside wall of the Space Center building, they would fall to their death.
Objection!
Ordinarily, yes. But after the bombing incident, the culprit could make use of a certain item. And what item was it exactly, Mr. Wright? Alright, this is what the culprit used to leap into the outside wall of the main building. We have more pictures, and I'm pretty sure one of them is a picture of the stairwell, right? Do we have that? Oh, the emergency ladder. There it is.
Take that!
An emergency ladder? There was an emergency ladder in the 4th floor robotics lab, and it was used that day after the explosions to help evacuate people. Miss Blackwell herself used that ladder to escape down to the ground level. Recall that the launch pads were switched after the ladder was lowered. The corridor would have passed by the ladder while the pads were being switched. And that's when the culprit literally sprang into action. And leapt onto the ladder. What? Who would have imagined?
Order in the court. Well, an alternative escape route seems to have emerged.
Which means someone other than Miss Sykes could have been the culprit, right? Making things up on the fly in an attempt to sway the court again, are we, Mr. Wright? Your theory has so many holes it puts Swiss cheese to shame. Alright, then, name one. I have here detailed information about the Space Center. According to this, the distance between the museum corridor and the main building during movement is a full 20 feet. 20 feet? You're pulling my leg, right? In addition, the corridor is 3 floors from the ground, or roughly 50 feet. What's more, the culprit would be leaping to a precarious place. An unstable ladder. Human beings feel fear in dangerous situations. It's a basic survival instinct. An ordinary person would certainly hesitate before jumping. Or even freeze in fear and not jump at all.
Objection!
But the culprit had just murdered someone. They weren't in an ordinary state of mind.
Objection!
Nevertheless, why would they have taken that kind of risk? Because they're the spy, and they know no fear. They could have waited for the switch to be complete and escaped to boarding lounge 2.
Objection!
Because there was a security camera in boarding lounge 2. The culprit knew they would be recorded if they left the Space Museum that way.
Objection!
In that case, the culprit could have hidden in the museum until things settled down, and then blended in with the other people after the museum was opened. That's a good point. But you claim that despite all this, the culprit took a 20-foot, death-defying leap, and all in the brief moment the corridor and ladder passed by each other. That's also a good point. They would have needed a running start while the corridor was moving to make that jump. If their timing was off, or if they couldn't jump far enough, it would have been instant death. What kind of person would attempt something like that? Stop bringing up good points, Edgeworth! This true culprit of yours is nothing but a figment of your imagination. A phantom. Why do you always have to point out every flaw? Mr. Edgeworth's right. That does sound pretty insane. The culprit would have to be someone who feels no fear, like a stuntman. But everyone feels fear on some level, right? Wait a minute. Aha. I've got it this time. I can prove that there's someone who could have used this alternate escape route. Oh, can you now? Oh, goody. This proves the possibility of a person who could have used this alternate escape route. It's going to be something about the spy, right? Yes. Oh, the subject's emotions rarely fluctuate, and he doesn't experience feelings like normal people do. It's the psychological profile
Take that!
of the Phantom. What's that, Mr. Wright? This is a certain person's very interesting psych profile. The subject doesn't experience feelings like normal people do. In other words, this person doesn't feel happiness, sadness, or fear. Doesn't feel fear. Right! You can't be serious. Without the constraint of fear, he could easily do what an ordinary person wouldn't dare. Just as you or I could do a broad jump on the ground without the slightest fear. This subject could make a 20-foot leap 50 feet up in the air. He could choose this extreme way of escaping without hesitation. So you're saying that to a person without fear, the alternative route would be quicker and eliminate the chance that they'd be spotted. That's definitely pretty extreme, Mr. Wright.
But was there such a person there at the scene? Could there have been? Was it me?
Yes, the Phantom, that mysterious, shadowy figure who keeps popping up.
Oh dear! The Phantom!
The Phantom? Again? I knew the Phantom was there behind the scenes of the Space Center bombing, but I wasn't sure if he was connected to the murder of Clay Tarrant as well. However, now it's all clear. The Phantom is the one who not only bombed the Space Center, but also killed Mr. Tarrant.
What?
What? Ah!
Order in the court! Order, I say! Mr. Wright, please continue!
There were just too many similarities between this case and the one from 7 years ago. But why, you may ask?
But yes, I was going to ask that.
It can only be because both incidents were the work of the same Phantom. So then this Phantom is the one who killed Clay? I'll kill him! I'll kill this Phantom! I'll use my mummy ghost powers and I'll kill him! But who is he? So I can kill him! Apollo, come down and kill him. The Phantom's been haunting this case, pulling the strings in the background. Who could this unidentified international spy be? Right, this escape route must have been a part of the Phantom's plan from the start, as was tricking Director Cosmos into switching the launch pads. The bomb on the second floor was meant to make the elevators and stairs unusable. That's why he gave advance warning and planted the bombs where he did. Yes, I think you're right. But it doesn't explain this one last thing. So I lowered my emergency ladder like the detective leading the evacuation told me to. But it was such a pain. Why couldn't they have used the ladders in the other rooms? The robotics lab wasn't the only room with an emergency ladder, but he couldn't have made that leap unless he was certain which one it would be. So you mean the Phantom must be someone who knew that particular ladder was going to be used? Uh-oh. That's right.
Who could it be?
Oh, crap. Wait a minute. So I lowered my emergency ladder like the detective leading the evacuation told me to. Miss Blackwell lowered the ladder after being told to by the detective leading the... Ah! Ah! You've got to be kidding me. Did you figure it out, right? Do you know who the Phantom is? Yes, I do. Who is it? Who killed Clay? Our mystery spy, known as the Phantom, is none other than international foreign... a complete foreigner. It's Bobby Fulbright. God, I don't want it to be him! I really don't want it to be him, but, ugh. After the explosions, a member of the staff crossed paths with a certain detective. I was on duty on the 4th floor. It was quite the madhouse, I tell you! As for the detective who was leading the evacuation from the 4th floor, he had a very specific objective in mind. So I lowered my emergency ladder, like the detective leading the evacuation told me to. His objective was to secure his own escape route. We lowered an emergency ladder from a 4th floor window and escaped that way. Once everyone else got out safely, I made my way down too and headed to the shelter. This is a detective you all know. He's even the lead detective on the current case. And is he in the room right now? Hey, Fulbright, are you in the... He appears to be a very emotional man, but his psych profile says he is without emotion.